why placing automation into it is actually not replacing human yet is because you are basically just augmenting the humans right now. Like you are actually bring back the capacity they should have, but they don't have at the first place. And that is basically picking up the call immediately, try to automate as much as possible, and then only hand it off to the human agent for the critical tasks.
Hi all, very warm welcome on Oleum one more time. Marcus, again, a pleasure to be with you today.
Hi.
And so today we are extremely lucky because we are with you, Shawn. So, first of all, hi, Shawn.
Hi.
So you are the CTO and co-founder of PolyAI, which is probably one of the hottest AI company today. So we can't wait to essentially dig in your own past and learn about like the genesis of the project, maybe how you switched like from one product to another, maybe what you changed, like coming back on your founding history, maybe like also like the market dynamics that are pushing you forwards, etc. So again, thank you very much to be with us. Maybe to start the chat in 2 minutes, do you think you could give us a description of what PolyAI is?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So yeah, my name is Shawn, co-founder and CTO of PolyAI. Been with the company since the beginning. Now is like 8 years-ish. So it has been a while. So when we started PolyAI, we basically wanted to build a voice agent for enterprise contact centers, and then that has been the mission that we have been working on until today. And then it was actually like very lucky that we actually catch up with this like a new wave of like AI agents and conversation AIs. And then here we are today. We are running a lot of voice agents for enterprise contact centers. We work with a few of the largest enterprises in the world, including Marriott, FedEx, PG&E, and a couple of financial institutions as well. And we also grow quite fast in healthcare space. So yeah, I think coming from like more technical research background and started the business, and then through the journey, basically learning how to do sales, how to do product, how to run a large engineering organization. And yeah, here we are today.
And so you mentioned, researcher by background. Like all of you as co-founders, really. So you met at Cambridge. Do you think you could go back to maybe really like the genesis of everything? You did research in that space. Maybe why? Because I remember, so we met a while ago. We shared like an office space. And I have to be transparent, at the time where I was seeing you guys talking to Alexa, I thought it was a bit weird. So how was it, at Cambridge? Why did you decide to go towards that specific line of research?
Yeah,
that would be helpful.
Yeah, so this will have to trace back with when I was studying my undergrad back in Taiwan. So I'm a Taiwanese originally, and then in Taiwan it's all about semiconductors and then chip manufacturing, right? As a cliche, I also studied electrical engineering back at that time, and then and I think after studying like maybe like 2 years, about all these hardware they design. I decided I'm probably not the best for that kind of career track, because I think that you have to mess around with the hardwares, and then a lot of time when you build something, you don't actually get an instant feedback loop, right? You have to design the chips and you send it to the manufacturer, and then they will have to manufacture for a couple of months time, and then you come back with the system and you can test it. So I just thought that feedback loop was a bit too long. And then I started to get into software development because, the feedback loop is very instant and very fast. And then in software engineering, one of the particular subject I started to touch upon was speech recognition. And I thought that was pretty cool because back at that time, it was basically using quite a sophisticated mathematical model to model human speech. So I thought that that's actually a cool subject, and that's how I started my research career there. That was like probably like third year of my undergrad, and since then I have been doing speech recognition, and then therefore like when I applied to study my PhD, I got into Cambridge, which the supervisor I worked with was called Steve Young. So he was an expert in the speech recognition field. But then back at that time, he has already started shifted all his research towards, conversation AIs. Back at that time, people still call them the dialogue systems, which is like, a lot more technical, a lot more like, practical terms. But I think, so then once I went to Cambridge to study with him, I met my co-founders, and then that's kind of like the research subject we have been working on since then.
Okay. And so at the time, so I mean, now, like when we see those AI applications, I mean, it seems quite obvious, like the types of applications they can have, like for businesses, etc. Even though, I mean, most of them are still trying to figure things out. I mean, at the beginning, when you enter in a, let's say, research mode, I mean, did you have in mind at that point in time, so yeah, 8, 10 years ago, that you would be able to commercialize something, or it was just for the beauty of researching and, advancing, etc.?
Yeah, I think, once we started the business, you will realize that the research world is very different from the actual commercialization, because commercialization has so many different factors you have to consider: the market appetite, the consumer behavior, the maturity of the technology, and then how do you package up as a product? What does the pricing look like, and things like that. So I think back at that time, surely we think about how to commercialize that technology. And I think when we were doing our PhD studies, Google Assistant or Alexa would become quite popular. And then that was the last wave, was like, IoT, right? Internet of things. You wanted to connect all your home the devices into this smart speaker, and it can help you to do a lot of stuff. That's why like you saw us talking to Alexa back at that time. We basically just bought a couple of Alexa devices and just put it in the office. So we are just like testing what are the capabilities there. So I think back at that time, you can totally see that voice interface is definitely something that will be in the future. But unfortunately, the voice interface has been in the future for the past 10 years. And I think that we are still saying that it's the future modality of interact with computers. So I think realistically, it's like, the technical challenge is still there. And then, I think product is becoming mature, but there's also another problem that we is the consumer behavior. It's like, what is the best scenario to talking to your voice agent, right? Like when you are working in our office, talking to a AI feels a bit weird over a phone, or even using voice. The most acceptable scenario you can think about is basically in the contact centers, where many people call in, a lot of the calls not answers, a lot of people got put on hold for a very long time. So automating that seems like a very reasonable step for the forward.
Yeah, no, I remember the IoT phase when I think at one point I was kind of considering setting up a connection with my washing machine and all kind of other products. But it was an interesting phase. Yeah, it's
Totally. Back at that
but
time, I remember Samsung just has like a smart food refrigerator. I was like,
yeah.
what do you need that for? And then like a feature is like you have the camera inside the fridge, and then take a picture of all the ingredients in your fridge, and then say they can recommend what to cook tonight. I was like, why don't you just open the fridge and then take a look?
Yeah, it was interesting. But hey, it was I think it worked for some applications for sure.
For sure.
For others, it was maybe a bit of a side thing. But yeah, I think you mentioned voice. It's the same with Alexa, right? I mean, some things it's really useful for, and some things, I mean, you just don't need it for. And
Yeah.
I think specific one that I'm kind of interested in is actually Siri, because
Yeah.
I think Siri, for me, I was super excited about it when it came out. It's actually turning itself on right now, which is
Yeah.
not good.
That's right.
Can you hear me? Still?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Oh,
I
great.
can still hear
Sorry,
you. Yeah.
it just turned itself on. Perfect example of what I was just trying to talk about. It didn't really work that well. You know, it was kind of the issue was that it was a bit ahead of its time and it wasn't working as well as it really should, like turning on in situations like this. And you know, I think when you spun out, so when you spun out of the, what do you think about that? Was it too far ahead of its time? And you know, how has the world changed since then in terms of the application of AI into that as well?
Yeah, and I think the entire Siri and even Google Assistant and Alexa is the same story. I think all this technology was a little bit ahead of its time, and it's ahead of its time in terms of both technical feasibility, but also the consumer behavior. And then what is making situation worse is that one, the two of them actually form like a vicious cycle, and then it just gets worse and worse over time. Give you an example, right? We probably have some experiences in talking to Siri or Google Assistant in the past. Maybe you just happen to wanted to ask it to tell you a joke, sing a song, whatever, right? And then the response was, "Sorry, I don't understand that," right? And then you just feel frustrated about it. But then guess what? Because I know a lot of people work in Siri and Google Assistant. The reality is that they have a huge team of engineers and product managers in the background looking at what queries like is the most common. Now, if you ask Google Assistant or Alexa about playing a song, well, singing a song, or even tell you a story, it probably works now. But it's just like once you try it once and it doesn't work, people don't tend to come back to try it for the second time. And it's just
Yeah.
like, because the technology was not there, and then consumer had a high expectation. And once they
Yeah.
try once, it didn't hit the bar, then it just goes down and down. And then the problem is that the personal assistant, the use case and domain is way too broad. So then you kind of have to do a lot to actually cover that entire very wide coverage of what a consumer would ask. And that is just a very difficult task back at that time. I think those teams actually did heroic stuff to actually get the system running and then cover a lot of use cases, but still they are always chasing the tail, and that's just very hard to do.
And did you think it was just the fact that? So did you think it's the technology aspect that was just too hard to achieve at that point in time,
Yeah,
or is it that now with LLMs, like what is it for a non-technical person that makes the difference? Is it the amount of touch points that you have in the
yeah.
system?
Yeah. I think it's always about the long tail use cases, because I think a lot of these conversational AI use cases, because the natural language is the modality comes with a lot of flexibility, right? So you can say the same sentence, the same meaning in so many different ways. And I think back at that time, the machine learning model just didn't have the ability to have this general understanding. So then you always need to program the most common use case and most common sentences a user would say. But then the long tail is just huge and you can't really cover all of them. What LLM does differently is that the model is pre-trained. And then that's very important, right? Because LLM is pre-trained means that it has been trained on, billions of the data online. So it has seen so many different situations and scenarios that whenever you submit a query, it can have a very general pattern matching to help you to find what will probably be the most relevant response to your question. And that is just the power of LM, because it memorizes a lot of things online. Now, I think that causes another problem, which is, the hallucination problem. Is that, you asking some questions and it doesn't actually have a legitimate answer, but it just try to pattern match you to the closest answer you can find. So then that's a different problem we are dealing with now. But I think it's definitely a step forward, because in order to get out of that vicious cycle, I just tell you, right? Because once you ask something, the agent just say, "I don't understand." That is really further frustrating, and then you don't want it to engage you with the agent anymore. And this the hallucination, you will probably, even the answer is wrong, he probably come back with some interesting answers, or some angles. You have nothing think about it before, and then it was like, okay, well, I at least it has enough juice to actually keep you going in that conversation.
So you're essentially saying that human beings prefer to have a very wrong answer rather than have like a truthful answer saying, I don't know.
I mean, like, in all the social network issues of all the, politics we saw in, like, mid 20, maybe 2015, 2016, all the elections and things like that. We know that, humans are by default drawn to their own opinions, right? And then, yeah.
And so to go back to the evolution of PolyAI, so you were all researcher. So at what point did you realize, okay, we have something which can become a company, we have something that we can commercialize? Because I would assume that, you could continue researching forever, essentially, and
Yeah,
not commercialize anything. At what point in time, so when, really, and what was the trigger?
yeah. I think, back at the time when we were at the end of our PhD, we kind of, there's a, like, question in front of us, is that what do we wanted to do after that? And then, to be honest, like, back at that time, all the three of us was, thinking about continue that research journey. So, and then, and then we wanted to actually see the big companies and big lab and how they do things. So, Nicola was working with back at that time. I went to Google brand to do a bit of research there. And Eddie went to Meta, right? So, like, all the three of us actually went to these big research labs. And I live in California for like 3-4 months time. After that, and I just realized that probably the reality is that, back at that time, the big companies are so prominent. You can actually join them anytime. But starting a bit business require the right kind of moment and the right kind of people. And then it just happened to be the case that, all the three of us try out these big tech companies and realize, actually, it's a very chill life, but, it doesn't seem as exciting. And we were all still young. So we just like, hey, maybe we should actually do something together. So that's kind of like the real motivation back at that time. To be frank with you, we started without really thinking about commercial and what to do. We only started thinking about it later. We know the technology is going to be useful in one way or another, but really to actually how to take this product to market back at that time, we didn't think about it as much, to be frank with you. We just think that, people is important, and, having the right kind of technology and have the right kind of people is what prompted us to do this.
And so, even at the early days of PolyAI, so you were still doing, as you said, like a lot of research.
Yeah.
And then, you hit on something you could commercialize. So you had to switch, would assume, the mentality a bit of the company from research lab to commercial entity. Did you have to make like specific hires, or one of you guys said, okay, I will transform myself in 48 hours in the biggest salesperson ever? How did that work, really?
For sure. Back at that time, the voice technology arguably wasn't really that ready yet. And I think that you can build systems in a way that it is actually very good for the majority of the use cases that, a particular customer is looking for. But it's not really as scalable as what we have today using LLM as an orchestration. And also because of that, convincing people to adopt this kind of technology is also quite challenging, because people have bought, IVR systems, and then that is actually very easy for them to compete. But using these voice agents you have to train the model, collecting the data, you have to, implement business logic, and you have to synthesize the voice. That was quite a heavy lift. And then, so therefore, like, back at that time, we didn't actually figure out a way to actually sell this through like some APIs. So then, Nicola, our CEO and the co-founder, he will have to transform himself into a full salesman back at that time. He basically, to be honest, like, the company's sales engine until today was actually built by him from scratch. And then, I think he hired couple of like, leaders on the journey. But then to be honest, I think he was the main person driving that entire engine behind the scene. I think founder just need to actually figure it out themselves, because even if we hire someone that is, a seasoned sales leaders, they don't necessarily know what is your product and what is your technology, and then they still need to learn how to sell it, because back at that time this is not really a commodity yet. This is like a very, very new thing. So convincing people to buy it was actually very hard. So having founder driving that, it was very important.
Yeah, especially in like a very technical field, you almost have to have a founder that comes from that background, and then the sales part you can probably learn on top. I'm interested, just digging into that relationship a little bit more. In some of the interviews and articles, your co-founder Nicola, often he describes himself as a nuisance or a talker,
Yeah,
and how do
he
you?
is definitely.
Yeah, which I guess every good salesperson has to be like that in a way sometimes. But how do you manage the dynamic, and how do you how does your relationship work now? Because I guess if you're moving into that visionary role, then you need to be a bit more in the future. And how do you keep how do you manage that and keep it grounded in the technical capabilities that can actually be achieved?
Yeah, yeah, and I think founder dynamics is actually super important. I have, in the past year of, in the past 8 years of the PolyAI time, we do actually see a few employees also went out, which is start their own B2B business as well, and I keep in touch with them. I also, seen some of since the people went to entrepreneur first or YC, for example. And I would say that more than half of a company fail because the co-founders don't get along with each other very, very well. And that's actually, one of the tough things to actually get right. The thing is like, even though like, Nikolai is actually talks a lot and sells a lot, he is not really a pure salesman. He's still deeply technical. I would say that, even before he become the CEO, he was actually probably one of the most technical out of the three of us, because he went to IOI. He did a competitive programming and that kind of stuff. So he's actually very inherent technical himself as well. So when he started to becoming a salesman, a lot of the ask that he's actually asking us to do was actually not that ridiculous. It's not like, a typical salesman would actually come back, our client would request this, can we do that? A lot of things would already be filtered by him, because he knows inherently what is technically feasible and what is not. So those relationships was actually not that hard. I think it's more about like the personal way of dealing with things, especially dealing with stress, is actually very important, because like the way that he's dealing with stress is just like force himself to work more. The way I deal with stress is that I just go away and then not think about it for like a day or two, and then come back later. So sometimes these like personal way of coping certain situations is probably going to cause a bit of friction, but it just requires you guys to actually get to know each other a bit more, understand how each other cope with things in different scenarios, so that you can actually gradually learn how to work with each other a lot better. So I think that's probably like the primary thing in that relationship.
So how did you choose who would wear like the sales and commercial hat? Really, did you vote and you said it's gonna be you?
Well, because he likes to talk a lot by before he becomes that guy. Because I'm not. I don't shine in those kind of social or mingling situations. I found it like quite annoying. I like to, in those events, usually I enjoy is that when I actually bump into someone who has a lot of good ideas, and then we actually have a very long conversation. But in a lot of these like networking social sales, is that you have to have good touch points with everyone, right? So you don't have the option to select who you wanted to hang out with in that situation. I'm very selective in that social circle, in even my friendship circle as well. But he's just like very good with everyone, and it was like the obvious like, yeah, okay, well, you do.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe like, so I mean, you've seen like the research lab model, and what do you think about it if you want to commercialize a product? I mean, is it a great platform, or do you think that maybe an environment where you are essentially incentivized to research and not necessarily find some sort of product market fit? Is it like a great platform, or maybe it's almost a trap in some way?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question. And I think you see cases that become wildly successful. You also see like cases that just becoming a complete disaster, right? So if you look at the past, the couple of like really successful research lab, obviously OpenAI was the one that became super successful, and then they started the commercialization. But as you can see on the headline and newspaper, once they started commercialization, a lot of the key people left as well, right? And if you look at, I mean, in the OG of research lab was Microsoft Redo Research back at that time. And then they actually attract a lot of good talent, but they didn't actually produce a lot of actual commercialization in terms of AI technology. Even Google, for example, like, Google back at the time has Google brand and DeepMind. DeepMind actually did a lot of like fantastic research there. They were not focused on commercialization. And Google was, in the early day of LLM competition. They were taken over by the OpenAI, right? So you can find either ways, really. The difference is, I think, for successful research lab versus non-successful ones is probably about whether you are still an organization, you need to actually see for profitability or making money yourself. I think OpenAI was very successful because they are a research lab, but they still need to find a way to commercialize, because they really need to continue to make money to continue to sustain their research effort, right? While I think they might didn't have to do that because it was actually part of Google. Google has a lot of money. So sometimes having a lot of money, a lot of resource is actually a curse rather than a blessing. So yeah. But yeah, I don't know
It's a
whether
good
it's
curse to
actually the
have,
right thing
though.
to do. Yeah, it's a good curse to have. Your life is a lot more, chill and then not that stressful. But that also means that, you are probably not going to be the first breakthrough when the commercialization of a technology becomes a reality.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned AI models like ChatGPT and OpenAI. So talking, maybe moving a little bit to the product and the tech stack, like what actual models do you use? I mean, do you use multiple models? How does it work under the hood?
Yeah, we use multiple models. I would say 80% of the voice traffic in our going into our platform now is using our own in-house, the open source. So we train our own in-house model by taking a open source model and do the post training on top of that, so that it's faster, it's cheaper, it's also more performant as well. And then we also supplement the tech stack with GPT predominantly, and we also use Claude as well. But Claude is predominantly in different use cases because Claude is a lot slower, but the quality of it for like codings or large context understanding is pretty good. So we use it for different kind of use cases where you can have a longer inferencing time, but the quality of output is super important. So we kind of mix match with a couple of models there.
And I mean, you were around before LLMs already, right? So how
Yeah.
have the LLMs changed the game? Because how was it working beforehand? Like, what kind of technology were you using then?
Yeah, I mean how it worked previously was actually very similar to Google Assistant or Siri, that kind of technology, right? The only difference is that because our use case was actually a lot more focused, because when you phone into contact center, if you phone your bank, pretty much, just a couple of use cases. Yeah, you are not going to tell your banking assistant to actually tell you a joke or, sing you a song, right? So it's a lot more niche use cases than personal assistant. So therefore, those kind of use case was actually working pretty well even before LM. But it's a long tail use case is always hard to deal with. It's like, we have a restaurant deployment, and we expect majority of people asking questions about the menu. or book a reservation. Actually, we got 10-15% of the caller calling in try to find a job, and that is just something we didn't expect, right? So and then so that was the previous generation. When LLM ChatGPT came along, we realized that we have to throw everything away because that's kind of like how it works, because it was quite clear at some point that this technology is way more superior than the previous generation, and that is just something that we have to do anyway. At some point, we decided that we stopped developing the old technical stack. We're going to throw it all away. And then later on is a year or year plus of like moving the existing customer base to that new technology. That was really, really painful. I think we are almost out of it now. I think we are 80%, 90% of our customer base now running on the new technical stack.
So just so I'm clear, we are clear with this. So before the arrival of ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, etc., so you were using your own models trained by you. You had like commercialized the product, sold it. And then when it came around, you said, okay, we can't do without those models because they are extremely powerful, which means we need to rebuild the infrastructure, which you did. And what was so complicated in moving clients? Because I would imagine that the clients are, they have like their own sort of interface. Like for a non-technical person like me, it feels like you unplug a cable, you plug another one, and you have some downtime for 24 hours. It's not like this.
It's never easy, right? Because the old system was built in a very completely different way, and you need to build that new system in the new way. And that mapping to the old way to new way is not necessarily a one-on-one mapping, right? And then also you have to subject to, because like also it's a contact center software, right? A contact center is where technology doesn't evolve as fast. So if you deploy a system, it's kind of working for the client. They sometimes don't have the incentive to move away from it. And I think this is just like in general, enterprise software in general, because when internet hits, there was 1999, 2000, 2001, you have a lot of consumers going on the website already. But it's only in 2006, AWS launched cloud, right? And then all the enterprise workflow gradually move into cloud. I think like a couple of years earlier, like people are saying that we are now global, software infrastructure, 60% is on the cloud now. It's like how slow that movement is, right? Because enterprise move a lot slower than consumers because they have a lot of existing inertia, and a lot of the people using those software because they have to do their job, not because they are interested in the product itself. So ask them to move away from the existing software is actually quite a lot of hurdle. So it's a coupling of technology, but also the enterprise, preferences as well. It's more of the client side rather than the technology side. Yeah.
So just a side question. So you mentioned like the anecdotes with people calling for jobs. So if I call one of your clients today, like using PolyAI, and I start asking the agent, can you sing me a song? Would the agent sing me a song, or would
no? I don't think so. I think it will be like a GPT style apply. Politely reject your request. So it understands what it means, but it was instructed not to do so.
Okay, makes sense. And so talking about anecdotes, so I'm sure, so I mean, you deal with enterprises, so once you onboard like a client, I would assume that the agents will start receiving thousands of calls, which they need to, which they need to deal with. Do you have an anecdote where like the agent went completely rogue? And what did he do, and how did you solve that?
Yeah, usually I think I was thinking about the antidote, and the most funny one, probably not aging completely wrong, but I think it's an interesting one. Is like during the COVID times, all the restaurants and hotels are closed, right? And then back at that time, we deploy our agent into a lot of other restaurants. And then, but those systems were still running because, like, although the restaurant closed, but the client still wanted them to be to launch there to actually answering phone calls because they don't want humans to answer those phone calls anyway. And then I think at some point we started to getting some robocalls. So you just, hear like two bots in a while, improvised talking to each other. And then we would listen to them. It turns out that it's the Google Duplex system. I don't know whether you know about that product, but that's basically like an outbound agent that, so you can actually talk to Google Assistant, and ask the system to help you to make outbound call to make table reservations or hairdresser and whatever like that. They have like some marketing around that. But during the COVID time, they actually launched those agents to reach out to every Google Map shops to asking for their new opening hours. Are they open? Are they closed? What's the situation? Because during that period of time, nobody is updating their details. And you remember there was like sometimes the quarantine is like, it's like they started the quarantine and they say, oh, we don't have the quarantine anymore, and then come back to it. So there's a lot of mess there. So I think Google Map was back at that time just making those outbound calls. So actually reached out to this shop to actually understand, hey, what's the situation now? And you just hear like these two agents on the phone talking to each other basically. That was actually pretty fun. We actually have a blog post about that as well back at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you're based in the UK, right? So I'm sure that
Yeah.
you've been called by. I mean, like 3 or 4 years maybe ago, I think there was this page where you get all these calls. I certainly did, and it would be like, "Hello," and then like there would be nothing for like 5 seconds, and 10 seconds later, it'd be like, "My name is," and I work for this company. So like it was super obvious, right? That it was an agent, but it was also really badly done. But now it's almost the opposite. So now the standard AI models, they're super chatty and they're very verbose and they talk a lot.
That's right.
And you've argued in the past that this is actually a mistake for business use cases. So why do you believe this?
Yeah, I would say that it's not necessarily a mistake. It's really about what you are building the agent for. If you are building for the consumer, you probably want it to be very chatty. And then even different LLM models have their own standing, right? If you read the news about Grok recently, you probably seen that it's just a uncensored version of the LLMs. And if you talk to Anthropic, they kind of just branding their LLM as like a good person, the kind of vibe. So I think it's really the standing of the company, like where they are and what is their business for. For us, because we're building these agents on behalf of our clients, so it's really important to actually reflect their personal branding, right? So if it's a restaurant and they want it to be very welcoming and very friendly, then yeah, you should inject a little bit of chatty character into it. If it's actually a bank that it's helping you to do like the critical financial tasks, you want it to be more like discreet. You want it to be more like trustworthy, that kind of vibe. So it really depends on the organization and why you are building the agent for.
Okay, so do you think, just to follow up on that one, so do you think certain models are, like you mentioned, some are more polite, so would you then pick a certain model for a bank and you would be like, okay, I'm going to pick this model, maybe not Grok because it's a bit too uncensored, but I might pick something else. Is that how you would do it, or would you change the prompt?
Yeah, you usually started with the prompt because that's the easiest, right? But then if you do actually need to actually go extra mile than the prompt can do, then you will have to fine tune the model a little bit. So we do actually do a lot of fine tuning over the model just because we want the model to be able to speaking in different branding languages a lot bit.
And so, like talking about bank finance, etc. So how did you finance the business? I mean, what was the financing journey really? So at the very beginning, back in 2017,
Yeah.
who essentially, maybe signed the first check up to now, where you've raised in excess of $200 million, including with Nvidia. So $200 million is a lot of money. So how
Congrats.
did you start,
Thank you.
at the beginning, and what essentially paced your financing journey
Yeah.
over time?
Yeah, so we started in the UK, right? And then we started to so we joined entrepreneur first as a pre-formed team, and then and we kind of going through that their accelerated rate program, and then back at that time because we know someone from Vocal IQ, the company who got acquired by Apple back at that time, our supervisor's company. And then he knows that we are starting a company. He started to help us to actually put together some like investor introductions. And then we were lucky enough to actually, talking to Amadeus Capital, and Herman Hauser was the person that, on the board eventually. So he wrote for the first track, and then they co-invest with the Passion Capital. And then that's why we were in Bavaria back at that time, because Passion was our early investors as well. Yeah, and then we started from there, and then we're lucky enough, to be honest, that we didn't actually have any product back at that time. And then we only started a bit of business, I think, for two months. And I think probably because of the research background, because back at that time, a lot of the VCs were looking for like, hardcore technical background founders. So we were lucky enough to be able to raise that quite early on. But then since then, we started to, in different stages, we talking to different VCs, and then our investor profile started to shift it towards more US. And then, Khosla Venture later joined the run. And then, they were being very helpful in terms of connecting us to the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And then we also have Point 72 Georgia, and recently had also Sophia also joined as well. And yeah, of course, and Nvidia too is on our board as well.
Okay, understood. And so maybe why did you decide to launch in the UK? So
Good question. It's just because I think we finished our studies, and then we kind of like, tied to this country to a certain degree. So that's how like we really started when we just came back from California and started a bit of business here. Arguably, either studied in San Francisco or London back at that time. I would say it's like 50-50 chance, but just happened to be that the other side of the 50 had happened, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned Passion, so we had them on the show, and also we had someone. We had someone on the show mentioning one of our show guests about how the US is really important at the later stage, and how it's difficult to get capital at the later stages. Especially when you want to go. You've gone through to Series D. Like, do you have a view on that? The US versus the late stage capital system in Europe?
Correct. Yeah, I think Europe has improved dramatically in terms of early stage capitals. And I think that if you want to raise money in Europe, in UK from European investors, it's actually not a problem these days. It used to be also challenging as well, but it's a lot easier. And also the money is like now is flowing very globally. You can get some Asian money here. You also have some, US investors, coming into UK and Europe as well. So I think early stage capital is less of a problem. Late stage capital definitely still a very big challenge. And this is usually coupled with the commercial tractions as well. I think it's just the fact that, US is a homogeneous market, and Europe is very heterogeneous just by the fact of the shape of the continent. And then if you wanted to sell in Europe, you need to stand up like sales teams, in each countries, because you kind of have to, you are people speaking their languages, understanding their cultures, how they buy software and things like that. And usually the entire Europe in terms of buying software is also a lot more conservative as well. I think that majority of the European enterprise is buying from the hyperscalers, which is understandable because is risk. It's much more like, robust and reliable, but not necessarily the best kind of product or technology will come from them. but it's just a very, very risk diverse play. So because of that, it's very hard to build a late stage companies that have a really strong commercial traction in Europe. So therefore, a lot of the companies, if you are successful in Europe, you have to move to US usually, just because easier to actually get market traction, easier to get video.
Yeah. And I mean, so you have an investor, you have Nvidia as an investor, which is, a fantastic investor to have, US based. So congrats on that. And then US based investor. So would they expect you to fundraise and I guess mainly base yourself in the US if you have a partner like that joining, or?
Yeah, I think it's like it's not like a particular investor demanding it, but it's the market. As you see the entire trajectory of the company, and then you see how things are going, that seems like an inevitable future anyway. Like for example, our revenue base. So we started in the UK. We started with all the revenue in the UK. Now, 80% of our revenue is in the US now, right? And then we are growing more than the double in the US, but growing in Europe has slowed down.
Is it because, I mean, it's natural, or is it because you are doing like a massive push in the US? Because at the same time, if you have like all your commercial team based in the US, it's normal that it's growing faster than.
It's a little bit of that loop as well, because you kind of initially we invest the property equally, and then you see where you get a pool, and then the more pool we see coming from US, so you double down and invest more because you have limited resources, right? So that becomes like that cycle that just pull you in.
And so, like, quick questions, like, so latest fundraising. I mean, you are valued above like 750 million. Again, a lot of money. what does it means in terms of expectations, in terms of future growth over the next like 2, 3, 4, 5 years for you? I mean, when they invest, what is essentially the key objectives?
Yeah, I think, for investors is always wanting to make money eventually, right? So I think that, the growth is like always the most important thing. And I think now we are in the AI race, and I think AI have the potential to change a lot of things. You see the SaaS stock market crashed really recently, right? Because of a worry of AI would be ripping apart a lot of these traditional softwares and then, becoming a new version of it, which is like, I think it's happening already. And I think that, exactly what the future will look like is hard to say, but it is definitely the case that there's a lot of like opportunities up for grab currently. So the investment really is about like, how do we actually capture that larger share of the market faster? Because the nature of the software we sell is quite sticky per se, because, like once you place in the AI automation into the B2B business, there's a lot of integration requires, but also that you kind of have to build an agent that understands their B2B business logic really well, so that you can deliver the B2B business ROI. Once you learn all of that, enterprise don't usually change their vendors that frequently, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity now. Getting those investment now, really the expectation is like, hey, can we go to market faster, capture a larger pie of the market right now?
And so you plan on raising more money in the near future?
I think it's always on the table, because the raising capital is really about how do you actually invest right now so that you can actually get a future growth better faster. So there's definitely, I do actually see that there's definitely a path that we started to work towards for the profitability, but I think that's not really the main subject of the discussion right now, because the market opportunity is huge right now.
And so I don't know if you can share like maybe a few numbers to grasp, I mean, the size of PolyAI today. Maybe,
Yeah.
I mean, if you can share financials, great. But if you can't, if you can share maybe like number of clients or number of calls you.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I think we are taking more than so we have more than 100 enterprise customers right now, right? And I think we are taking more than that's a good question. I don't have the number on top of my head because it's
Too
changing
big.
every day as well. I think we're probably taking like close to one million calls a day every day now. So it's actually like generating a lot of calls, a lot of calls and chats as well. So this is actually more like conversations, not just calls, right? Because that we also do chatbots these days as well. And then in terms of the revenue growth, we have been doubling the revenue growth, stated in the past, 3-4 years time. And then that's the plan for the next couple of years as well.
Great. And just moving a little bit to the market. So the market dynamics. What are the key market trends that you think are going to be shaping the voice / AI landscape in the next few years, now and in the next few years?
Great question. I think the voice, well, first of all, there's agents, right? And then you have the voice agents as well. I think the voice agent is becoming very, very powerful these days because it has the ability to do this, chain of thought with reasoning, be able to access to a lot of the context, a lot of the softwares that you're using, pull in those contexts and making a very smart decision. Voice agent is a very pretty much following that trend with a little bit of lag. Is because like voice agent has more difficult modality to solve for. It's because the voice modality, right? And then a lot of it is about understanding background noises, understanding when users stop talking, understanding that this is another person talking rather than the previous person, understand different accents, understand different languages. So that nature modality is more challenging to deal with. And then that turn-taking functionality, I don't think we have cracked it fully at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think because of that nature technical challenge is lagging a little bit behind the entire the text-based agent development, but it's actually definitely quite close, in their like progression in terms of technology. So yeah, and I think voice agent, there's another problem of voice agent is, I think we touched base a little bit earlier in the chat, is the consumer behavior, because chat is quite a common interface right now. Like you go on to ChatGPT, go on to Gemini, you just chat to it, asking for an answer. On voice is a bit harder. It requires certain use case in certain like scenario. People look into like smart speakers, people look into in-car assistant and use cases and contact center. I think the contact center is the obvious winner currently. I don't know whether there will be another modality or another use cases will come in more handy in the future. I don't know that yet. I think that's the consumer behavior is also one of the major problems to solve for this like, voice agent adoption.
So why do you think, like really basic things, why do you think this is picking up? Like why are we now replacing human beings with an AI?
You mean in general sense or in the context center?
In general sense, but I mean more specifically in your case, I would imagine that essentially, based on my like humble experience with different receptionists, like call centers, etc., experience was really bad. So that's the sort of basics. Really bad because the person you speak to very rarely try to understand your problems. Very rarely is directing you to the right person to talk to because there might be some ego involved. I don't know. They are hidden behind a telephone, so they don't feel the obligation to be, nice and polite sometimes. So there are all of this. So the experience was very, very bad, which I understand. It's that the best case for some sort of new technology to arrive and replace that. But ultimately, do you think it's not also a sign that human beings are becoming lazier and lazier, more disconnected in some way? So, when you are in a call center, I'm not saying that must be the dream job. You are sitting maybe now even at home, just with your headphones, like taking calls. You're not even, sitting next to someone. So those people become disconnected, they are not happy. So when they are not happy, they can't essentially respond in a good manner on the phone. So like my question is very much like almost philosophical, like why do you think PolyAI has a lot of space to grow and even had some space to be born. What do you think, like philosophically, what is the reason for that?
Yeah, you mentioned something about like, the contact center agents are not necessarily like super helpful, or sometimes they are they have a bad day and then they don't want to help you as much, or, they're probably not very polite to you, right? The reality is that customers behave even worse than that, because you can totally imagine if you have issue with your car and you phone in and you have to wait on a line for 30 minutes. And then once you get to someone, you are already impatient. That's an entire systematic problem. In fact, we have the first casino customer go live in the US. And then it's basically a concierge bot, right? And then back at that time, we were basically just listening to those calls. It's basically a bunch of people went to casino gambling and then get drunk and then call the concierge and swearing at them. We even have a marketing video. It's like a 2 minute long about basically just different ways that, humans are swearing to the virtual agent all over the phone. It's very funny. I can send you the link later. But the industry is fundamentally broken. It's not because the human don't want to help each other. It's that they will pay very little and they are not enough people to staff into the contact center to solve the customer's problem. And the reality is that because when a customer make a phone call into the contact center, in some of the business, the LTV of that customer drops to zero or even in negative, because the costs of like answering a phone and staffing an agent for that, because that math doesn't work, and also the labor costs continue on a rise, right? Which is actually good for everyone. I think people live in a better life than it used to before. Well, depends on the inflation, hard to say. But it's true that all these contact centers are under such a stressful financial situations. So then, and they are not, it's not because they don't have the motivation to solve the problem. It's just like they don't have the resource to solve the problem. And why placing automation into it is actually not replacing human yet, is because you are basically just augmenting the humans right now. Like you are actually bring back the capacity they should have, but they don't have at the first place. And that is basically picking up the call immediately, try to automate as much as possible, and then only hand it off to the human agent for the critical tasks. So we are only at the very beginning of that journey, is augmenting the existing workforce. Will that actually come into more automation down the line? I do actually think so, because the technology will become better. But I don't think it will be 100% automation in the end, because I think customer service, the nature of it is still service, right? It's about like humans solving problems for each other. AI now can help you to solve problems, and a lot of time you probably don't want a human to solve the problem for you, because it's more convenient to be transactional with a bot. I see that is a no-brainer. But in some cases, you still want someone to talk to you, explain to you their policies, and your interpretation of their policy is accurate. So you have a peace of mind. So I think that as AI become more prominent, human service will still exist. They will more becoming a premium feeling for some of the customers, but it's going to be cheaper to get them as well, which I think is a good thing overall.
Okay, no, make a lot of sense. So essentially, like the agent would get like an angry call from a customer, spend 10 minutes to calm the person down, and then pass him to.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Why do we do each other, better, right? You have emotions. Yeah, I know that you need to calm down. Here is the AI agent to help you to calm down.
No, make a lot of sense. I mean, I know it's still the early days, like in some way, of PolyAI. I mean, you're just saying it yourself. But what do you think could come next? So, I mean, you're dealing with customer service, which you think, well, you have also a lot of proofs telling you that was a good bet to, bet on that specific side of the market. What do you think would be next for PolyAI? So once you've conquered the customer service space for, let's say, mid-large companies. What's next?
It's already happening where in some use cases, we see that it's not just about customer facing use cases, especially, for example, in healthcare space in the US. I think we all know that the US healthcare is so broken right now. And from some of the customers we work with, we learned that every one call of the customer getting into their clinics or their contact centers, it would in average generate 5 to 6 calls in the background. And that is basically just like, clinics coordinating with doctor's office, coordinating with the hospital, coordinating with the insurance provider. Or does this customer allow to use their insurance in this particular doctor's office during that particular time or whatever like that? It's just like crazy, right? So I think there are a lot of those kind of calls that is actually administrative, but technically you don't really need to have those conversations, right? Because eventually you can find those records somewhere. That's why I think the system of record is actually a problem by itself, because it's just like living there, and then you still need humans to actually log in, understanding the nuances, and then be able to pull the data out and then answer questions. AI agent can do that altogether, right? So once you get the access to the system of records, you can automate the process. You don't need humans anymore. And then like humans are doing a lot of weird stuff, right? Like in the clinics, the concierge have a desktop in front of them. Someone phone in, the concierge needs to take down their details, entering their system of the record to fetch the patient's profile. And then if there's a form not being filled in yet, they have to say, can you help me to fill in that form over the phone? That's exactly how time was spent now, which shouldn't be the case in the future.
And so do you think you may envisage some AI, like in the short term, like, maybe acquiring like smaller companies, like targeting, as you said, like healthcare, for example, and you just, acquire like maybe a team doing this? Is something on your mind?
I think the consolidation of the market is definitely going to happen at some point, because there are too many players and too many competitors in the market right now. Because AI agent is a very popular market, and everyone is super excited about that. So I think there are way too many competitors, or way too many vendors, not a lot. The market demand is growing a lot as well, but it's not growing as fast as investor pumping money into the ecosystem. I think the MMA would have to happen. Market consolidation would have to happen for sure. Exactly when, I don't know. It could be as soon as this year. It could be next year.
So in terms of, one of the big things that we've seen other individuals on the show talk about being really important is hiring. So when you hire your engineering leads, I know you have a non-traditional approach to it. So you strike 70% of the job description.
Yeah.
And you focus on some other elements that are really important. Yeah, do you mind explaining a little bit about your hiring process and how you work?
Yeah, when we hire people, and then this is basically lesson learned from the past couple of years, hiring a lot of people, engineers, product managers, designers, and all of that. Really, it turns out that a person that can actually do really well at PolyAI in our organization is usually the people that we find that they are really strong at one thing, and then so typically, our interview process now is actually reflecting that, is that we do actually have multiple rounds of interviews. We really wanted to find like a person in the team really have a strong opinion about that person. Like, hey, I really wanted to hire this person because of this and that, rather than an average score from everyone, and then doesn't actually feel like, basically it's like a very good person, but like nobody actually fall in love with them, right? We want the team to fall in love with the candidate.
He was a good
because
guy.
Usually,
He was a good guy.
no, good guys, could be really solid as well, but we find that usually the X performers usually come from those kind of like, really like one of their strengths is like really strong.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you feel like interesting? I mean, because I know at earlier stages of the company, you were doing everything from machine learning to research to sales calls. Like, do you feel like in order to hire and have this hiring philosophy, you needed to, as a CTO, have got your hands dirty and worked on these different, spaces in the business to now know that that's what you need?
Yeah, and I think, that's actually not just CTO particular, it's actually the founder thing as well. I think founder needs to actually figure it out, especially if you have not, run any company or built any company before, you really need to actually understand every part of the business. And then if I look back, whenever I think there's a particular function or a particular department is actually not doing well, is because that founder didn't get our hands dirty into that department. Usually try to hire someone and then give them to run that organization would not really work as expected, unless you need to find someone that is also have the founder mentality as well.
And so just I'm thinking about like a question like unrelated to this. So now that you have you've built the business in Europe, most of the business now is in the US or growing much faster in the US. You have US investors. I'm sure you go to the US quite often now. So not as a tourist, but really almost as a local.
Yeah.
If you had to restart the business, where would you choose to start your business? Would that still be, because you said 50-50, but now that you are a more educated man on both sides, where would you do that?
Yeah, very good question. If I wanted to take the company to be like wildly successful, I would choose US. If I wanted to still have a work-life balance, probably in the UK.
I mean, you're saying this, but I mean, for us, at least, you seem to be widely successful.
Yeah, but there are several layers of success, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can
when you are
always
successful,
go
you can
higher.
be always,
Yeah,
unless you are Jensen Wang, that you are done, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, maybe last question to close our chat. I mean, if we had to have someone on the show, who would that be and why?
Oh, you mean like, is there anyone I would recommend, you were saying, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's some sort under our theme, which is innovation, private capital. I mean,
Not Jensen Wang. Someone
why
we
not?
could get on.
That could be. I mean, if you can arrange,
You can try. Yeah. If there's one I can recommend, I mean, I have a couple of people that I can recommend for sure, but I'm not sure whether, calling their name out here is actually good without actually letting them know first. But yeah, I have a couple of like, friends I can definitely recommend, and they are in a different journey of their company building as well. So, happy to actually share with
we'll see
you
that
guys.
in the backstage.
Yes.
But look, Shawn, it was an absolute pleasure. I mean, for us, you are like an absolute success already. I know you can go higher, and I wish for you will go higher. But it was very nice to have you with us today. I mean, we learn a lot for sure. I hope like the audience will also learn a lot. But thanks again.
Thank you. Well, good to chat to you
Thanks
guys.
so much. It was
Ciao,
really
bye.
great. Yeah, thank you, Shawn.